Hello and welcome to the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum. This is what we call the best part of your security week, brought to you by ClickArmor, which is the first interactive security awareness training, assessment, and engagement platform. This is session number 33 for November 29th, 2023. And I'm Scott Wright, the security awareness engagement guy. I'm joined by some new panelists today. We're really excited to have them for this important discussion topic. And for those of you who haven't attended before, just a few housekeeping details to start with. We'd like to have everybody who's attending type into the chat where you're joining us from around the world. It's really great to see international participation and just sort of makes us feel like a closer community globally. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to take a quick moment to remind people that the session is brought to you by ClickArmor. ClickArmor's security awareness training platforms, unlike anything that you've seen before. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to show you something in a few minutes that might pique your interest. But it's designed based on 15 years of my trying to get employees to pay attention to security awareness training, and having learned that gamification is really the key to keeping them engaged, even if they aren't gamers. So stay tuned. As I said, I'll show you a little bit of the fun parts of ClickArmor in a few minutes. So each of these sessions, I'll just do my little housekeeping part here. Each session is recorded, transcribed, discombobulated, reconstituted as blog posts. We post the recordings on YouTube and on our CSAF community site. And we also distill them into a quarterly CISO report on security awareness that provides really condensed, high-value insights for you. And so please do engage with our content, share it as well on LinkedIn or wherever you do your socials. And also feel free to type it in the chat, as I invited you to type in where you're coming from. Always feel free to type in any questions or comments on anything that's being said in the chat. So before I turn it over to Ryan, we're going to do a real quick roundtable and see where people are coming from today. We can see Victoria, BC, Germany, Elora, Ontario, Barrie, Chicago, Milwaukee, Ottawa, Colorado, Denmark, awesome, Washington, D.C., Beaverton, Ontario, love that, and Ramara. So I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to do a quick intro of our panelists, and we'll jump into the session.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. We've got, actually, I think 3 brand new panelists, first-time panelists to welcome to our group today. So first, we have Teresa. Teresa is the founder of Pop-Cykol, an emerging cybersecurity awareness company designed for kids. She's an award-winning children's music singer-songwriter. In March, she was a keynote speaker at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, speaking on how cybersecurity promotes gender equality. She has worked in cyber since 2014 as a senior technical writer and user experience designer. Welcome, Teresa.
Thank you so much for having me.
And next, we have Alana King. She's an instructional designer and agent of change with over 20 years of teaching, writing, and design experience. Her current projects include redefining literacy to include digital fluency and cybersecurity, developing a curriculum for journalism educators on the representation of disability in the media, and selecting Canadian written young adult fiction for the Ontario Library Association. A very busy resume. Thank you very much, Alana, for spending your time and your afternoon with us today.
I could have added that I also have ADHD. Maybe you can tell.
Yeah, Elena and I had a great chat last week, and both of us went on great tangents. I think it went an hour and a half.
I'll try to keep it short. Ryan. Thank you.
Oh, no worries at all. Thank you. And finally, Dylan. Welcome, Dylan. He is the business development executive for Canadian threat hunting company CyDef. He is driven to raise awareness around cybersecurity and to make it safer to do business online. On a personal level, if he is not working, he is in nature. From mycology to astronomy, it's all mesmerizing to him. So welcome, Dylan, and thank you for joining our panel. I'm Ryan from ClickArmor, and I'll hand it back over to Scott. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. So yeah, one of the first things we like to do in these sessions, have a few poll questions that I launched throughout the session. And I'm going to launch this one, which you're seeing maybe on the screen right now. It's basically a quick question to say, have you or your organization been involved with supporting vulnerable populations and within cybersecurity? So just want to get your thoughts on that. I may not have even mentioned what the topic of today's session was, but in any case, yes, we're talking about vulnerable populations. So feel free to enter your response in that poll, and we're going to move on, and we're going to start with Teresa and let her explain her perspective on the whole idea of helping vulnerable populations. So welcome, Teresa, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So, we primarily help children and caregivers with cybersecurity awareness. Our little slide kind of indicates different themes around cybersecurity. So, things like catfishing and online grooming to social media and mental health and romance scams. But we typically talk to kids about cyberbullying and how to treat people online. So we call that netiquette or online etiquette. And, just giving them kind of basic understanding of the technical aspects of cybersecurity. And so it is a vulnerable population. Children just don't have that capacity, mental capacity to understand like what they post could be, shared and it's never goes away, and that there are consequences to their actions if they are posting things that are mean or harmful.
Awesome. Do you find, just a quick question, do you find that the vulnerability changes over the age ranges, from the younger ones up to, near adults?
Of course, and as a cybersecurity awareness company, we have this wide spectrum of people that we've talked to, and so it goes from kids to even elderly. So I've given presentations to populations that are senior citizens, and they just have a different sense of technology. So they're not as familiar with having strong passwords or using multi-factor authentication or, the term phishing. So we have to craft,
Yeah.
presentations that are geared to each audience, but it's still kind of the same kind of elementary information that we're providing.
Yeah, I tend to think, of course, with the younger ones, they're in the more formative stages, right? They're taking in information and learning, where the older ones, I imagine, are kind of predisposed, I know it all, or I'm not worried about that, or, they've kind of got their perceptions.
Yeah, I was actually having a conversation with my son who is 12 years old, and he's a seventh grader. And we were driving in the car yesterday, and I was kind of explaining like how I grew up with technology, and that we've always had a television, we always had a landline, and then we got, I was in college in the 90s, and that's when I got like my first email. And the World Wide Web was kind of just this burgeoning um, arena for us to explore and discover new things. And then we get mobile phones and just kind of this transition of technology. Now we have artificial intelligence, and like everything else is just so advanced. So
Yep.
younger kids are experiencing really fast technology, and the older ones are kind of trying to catch up. Even my mom, who's 81, is still trying to figure out kind of the ins and outs of technology.
It's so funny you say that, Teresa, because my granny back home in Scotland, she talking about technology, she always had the fear of a cell phone and clicking on something. And we encouraged her. She's a part of a church there, and the church is with the library, and they ran a course like seniors and technology, and bringing her in and letting her it was a full month of her getting to learn her smartphone. But her now using WhatsApp and it's so funny for me when she shares these photos. And when she was last over, I was talking to her about this and like her experience with technology. And my granny is 87, and she told me, she goes, "Son, I learned to count with the silver shilling. That's medieval money for you." She like Tesla. She goes, electric cars. She goes, "I'd have never thought we seen the day," and now all this interconnectivity. So I think it's really an amazing event that's taking place, and we've never gone through it before as a people, right? So it's crazy to see it on both sides.
Yeah,
And to add
it's
to that, Teresa, you know, my husband Tim is in Ghana this week at the World Economic Forum talking about cybersecurity in developing countries. And I had a conversation with my 82-year-old dad about quantum computing and how that's going to be our next big threat. So, but you know what? But sitting him down and making it, you know, relate to geology or relate to something that was personal for him, he was all about trying to get his head around what quantum computing is like and what this is all going to mean for us. So I really hear what you're saying in terms of like it's the full breadth of the demographic that's
Yeah.
vulnerable.
Cool. And while you have the floor, Alana, I'm going to put up your slide so you can just carry right on.
So I'm hoping Amy will appreciate this slide because it's, you know, I didn't know where to begin and where to start, but Ryan, maybe just for that one on the left, do you have that link handy? You can provide the research on the left is from.
You'll have the link, Scott, in the
in the PowerPoint?
in the notes.
Oh,
in the
thank you.
PowerPoint notes.
Okay,
Yep.
sure. Yeah, one second.
From Statistics Canada. And what they did is they tried to isolate where our most, they didn't use the word vulnerable, but they said the most deprived demographics are in Canada. And they ranked them, this is Canada at a glance, but if you look through the research, you can see it by province as well. And you'll see some of those things are very much about geography in terms of being rural or being, you know, in a smaller place. We're talking, we have a lot of snow here, but we don't have a lot of cybersecurity. And you know what it makes me think of is that every single one of them, and this is one of those things, you know, Scott, when you were talking about earlier about your phishing exercise, was the fact that when I look at this population and the way that statistics have described it, I see people I love in this graph. I see people I know who are vulnerable, who are in every one of these columns. And that is like looking sort of in a mirror, right? And so there's that emotional response to it. And it takes me back to a lot of the things that I've based my work on, which is something we probably remember from a long time ago, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that we have to address these psychological needs before we can even get to the idea of safety. And recent brain science shows us that and this is in the bottom right figure now. Again, this is a diagram I borrowed from Harvard. And this is showing basically how we need to calm down our flight or freeze or fight parts of our brain in order for us to be able to even think about activating the frontal cortex of our brain where the learning takes place. So if we can't manage that, because as Dylan said, people are afraid of a click, we're never going to be able to access the higher level pieces of cybersecurity. So I think we have to start with creating environments, whether they're online or in person, whether they're training or in our communities, that feel safe for people to begin to start to explore the idea of learning about being more cyber safe.
All right. So any comments on what Alana's put up there in terms of the concepts and things that tweak you?
Yeah, you know what, Scott? I think the emotional response works on both ways. And the emotional response of that, dopamine, serotonin kick, when things do work out, encourages that good behavior. My granny would have never, the phone, no need. I pick up my dial one, son, I give you a call. Share videos with her grandkids, hooked, done. You've got her, you know, like being able to share those moments, being able to live stream to her, to have a chat with her. That positive, that emotional bit encourages her to go back and learn and learn and learn. So it works on both ways. And that's the beauty of cybersecurity awareness training as well. It's to encourage them.
Yep, for sure.
I was really struck by your comment about creating safe spaces and how do we do that for all the different types of vulnerable populations. I have a master's degree in genetic anthropology, and I've done a lot of work around people with disabilities. So how do we create a safe space for someone who has a physical disability or cognitive disability and have them, you know, participate in this advancing technology and cybersecurity awareness? How do we do that?
Well, one of those things I think is recognizing that there isn't just one shoe that's going to fit all people. With Scott and I first met because I was really interested in a gamification webinar that you had not so long ago. And I think that's part of it. But the nature of the game isn't always going to include everybody. At least that's how I always felt in grade 9 phys ed. You know, I'm not about the hard balls in the face and the loud noises and all of that, right? But if you asked me to sit down and do something mindful or something that was like my personal best and start to measure that, then that's something completely different. And so recognizing that that's true, I think that's part of it for me, is to take any of the things that we can assume about the environment and we think that there's a one size fits all type of person that's going to appeal to that. We, you know, just recognize that's not going to hit every target.
That's a really good point. My son is neurodiverse, and we're just kind of learning. I'm just learning about this now because I fostered him and then adopted him. And so I've had him for about 7 years now, and you know he learns very differently than someone like me, and I'm trying to figure that out as a single mom, and you know, figure out the path for him to learn the right way, or let me rephrase that, figure out how to learn the way he's going to learn best. So, you know, that's really important to find those different ways that people can learn.
Absolutely. Teresa, we're going to have a bottle of wine together at some point, because I also have a neurodiverse son who's now 19 and in college. But when he was in high school and having a lot of trouble recognizing that social cred, I guess, would get him invited into different kinds of learning situations. It took having his dad as a teacher to invite him into Cyber Patriot before he started to get really excited about group collaboration. And that sort of cooperative version, but in a competitive atmosphere, that's what worked for him.
Excellent. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and just speaking of kind of knowing the audience and adapting to them, great comment from Amy in the chat. What about visual and auditory alerts, such as utilize visual and auditory alerts for security warnings and updates, ensure that the alerts are customizable to cater to individual sensory preferences. So another great point of another, you know, population that, you know, we shouldn't exclude. And with just a little bit of technology and reconfiguration, you know, we can include multiple different groups and demographics and make cybersecurity for all. You know, if there's such a crisis in hiring, you know, then why aren't we making it more accessible? And you know, that's my kind of rhetorical question for everyone as well.
Yeah, and I want to take the opportunity, because the topic we just covered, you know, about not everybody is a gamer and people learn through different kinds of stimulus. I was going to do a little pitch and a demo of ClickArmor a little bit later, but I think it's actually a great opportunity, if you don't mind, for me to show people just how that actually can work. Because when you look at the ClickArmor platform that we have right now, just to give you a real quick tour, you know, this is the user dashboard. It just looks more visually dynamic than most training that you see, so people tend to be a little more open to it. The leaderboard, even though you're not a gamer necessarily, I find that people generally kind of think that they're in the top half of the organization proficiency wise. And so when they see that they're in the lower part, they, even though their names are obscured, they're all anonymized, they can see, oh, you know what, I think I'm better than that. I should go back in and do some more. So there are little cues like that that are not necessarily games, but they are the game mechanics that actually make things like video games work well. And this is another example. This is our phishing, in what we call immersive phishing simulation. So rather than sending out real emails to people to try and trick them the way I was the other day, we do it in a captive environment where people know it's not real, but because it has some little motivators, it helps you understand, you know, what's going to happen, and it will give you a little bit of more fun environment to get feedback and reinforce your knowledge and check on, you know, whether you're doing things properly or not. So we've got word searches where you just fill in the blanks. And we also have what we call weekly challenges or challenge streams, so that we can give people a really quick lesson or exercise on things like, you know, your fake voicemail messages. And these are just ways for people to see things that they're going to see in the real world. So that was my little very well-timed pitch to follow up on what Alana and Teresa were talking about. if you'd like to learn a little more about how ClickArmor works and how it might help your organization, definitely get in touch with Ryan or myself, or just visit clickarmor.ca and we can help you out. So I'm going to go back now and go into our next panel question. So how do you define a vulnerable person? So this could be anything. We sort of covered some of it, broadly, but, is it something to do with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or are there things demographically that maybe the non-psychoscientists could recognize? How do we understand whether people are vulnerable or not? Any comments from the panel or from the audience in chat?
All of us are vulnerable at some point in our lives. We begin our lives vulnerable. We end our lives vulnerable. And then there are episodes all through our lives that make us more or less vulnerable. So I think that's one of the universals, but that's my opinion. What do you think, Dylan?
You hit the nail on the head for me, to be honest with you. But if I'm being totally transparent, just as who I am as an individual, when I think vulnerable, I think innocent, being taken advantage of. And that for me is like what's vulnerable. And that's kind of like when we talk about senior citizens and kids and anybody else, it's that innocence that really gives me the ick feeling when they're being. That's how I describe vulnerable, and like that is just my opinion. You're totally right in the sense that I've been that young man that felt he was invincible and then felt very vulnerable in many instances. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I like invulnerable with kind of with education in a sense and of knowledge in a sense. So if you're not aware and educated and taught about something, then you are more vulnerable to that, right? So you can almost then link, that's how if I was tasked to find vulnerable communities, for when it comes to cybersecurity, I'd start to look at, okay, so who has been left out of the education sphere, right? And I know the Ontario school boards have left cybersecurity education off the table when it comes to our kids. I know that it's not talked about, to our elders, as much as it should. I know that, emerging communities in the indigenous populations that are getting connected to the internet for the first time ever are not given the education they need in order to be safe online. So, when you start to identify vulnerable populations, to me, it's anyone who hasn't been given the ability to learn. Because once you learn something, as we all know, we're less vulnerable to it. It comes to, where your fire exit is, you're less vulnerable to being stuck in the house. Where your brakes are, et cetera, et cetera. But we have to learn. And so I think then it comes back to us as cybersecurity professionals then to identify those vulnerable populations around you within an earshot, so to speak, and see what you can do to help them. So if that's volunteer your time, is that give out free resources? Is that, in Teresa's case, start a company and start to educate children on a mass scale? And in Scott's case, start a company and start to educate, on a mass scale. Those are the things that I think we need to do to tackle vulnerable populations and people.
One of the things I see that's like a common denominator amongst everybody here on the panel as well is to make it a good delivery, it has to be relatable. Like when Alana was talking about her dad, she brings over geology connection, like right away, right there, and then Teresa, you talking about your son, as he is developing and his passions develop, we grab onto those and we're able to mix it in and make it relatable to them. And that's what helps let it sink in. It's more of a what ClickArmor focuses on. It's more of a critical mind shift in how they're thinking about things, not just a repetition or like a muscle memory of knowing what to look for.
Yeah, Alana?
Well, I think, it's reminding me of what Teresa said earlier, and it's also Amy's point in the chat too. There's something about access, and I think access can be geographical, but I also think it can be because the interface isn't accessible. And, we have a new AODA compliance that's coming up that's going to mean new levels of accessible for all of us in Ontario. And I'm sure that there will be other provinces, other regions that are following suit with that. So it makes me wonder about what the things we can do to provide something in that interface to make it a little more relevant, as you were saying, Dylan, but also a little bit more appealing, enticing, something like that. What do you think I'm getting at there, Teresa? Am I on the right track?
Yeah, it was interesting that you talk about access. When I was at the United Nations and I was there for 12 days in New York, participating in all these different um, parallel programs and side presentations. They really talked about the lack of access or disenfranchised people. I think about how I define a vulnerable person as someone who does not have the full means to take care of themselves, someone who can be is capable of injury or harm. And I also, because I have a lot of lawyers in my family, I had a conversation with my mom last night about how do we define what a vulnerable person is. So at least in Colorado, based on our Colorado statutes, a person over the age of 70 is considered a vulnerable person. A person over the age of 18 who has a disability is considered an at-risk or vulnerable person. And if you commit a crime against that person, it's a sentence enhancement. So it could be a felony at that point, depending on the crime and what you're doing to that person. So people need to be aware that when they are committing a cyber crime against someone, that, if it's a child, if it's an elderly person, if it's a person with a disability, that's a sentence enhancement. And you'll have a larger fine or a longer term in jail.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to add, just we could think of it not so much as defining vulnerable, because when I do risk management, I always think about risks as being a combination of asset value or injury possibilities, threat levels, and then vulnerability as sort of the level of barriers between the threat and the asset. And so when we think of vulnerable people, maybe we could think about it as at-risk people, because some of those people who are vulnerable aren't necessarily at risk because they have the knowledge, for example. And so I'm thinking of one of my podcast co-hosts on the Shared Security podcast, Kevin Johnson. He freely talks about his home address and phone number and all that stuff. And so attackers could approach him any way they want, but he actually doesn't feel that he has anything to lose by publishing that information. So there are different ways that we are at risk, not so much just because of our protection, but because of the value, perceived value that we have to lose, or that attackers see as what they might gain by attacking you. So it's a combination of both the protection and the value that attackers face.
And that's actually the language that's used in the Colorado statutes, at risk.
Cool. All right. So I think next I'm going to bring up another poll and get people into this. It will be, which do you think are among the most vulnerable populations when it comes to cybercrime? So I put a long list here. And, maybe if you see a thing, or if something isn't here that you think should be, feel free to put other and maybe vulnerable as the preposition, so that we will know what you're talking about. But I think it's good just for people to sort of select which ones they think they see as being the most vulnerable. And it'll be interesting to see what the results are from that. So the next open question is, how can you learn about those who are vulnerable around you or at risk? And the most important risks faced outside the office. A lot of times we have security awareness managers running programs here on the panel or on the sessions. And so want to sort of help them understand how they can reach out to these people. But how can we, all of us, learn more about the people that are vulnerable around us?
I would say it's, oh, sorry, Ryan.
Nope, Dylan, all yours.
I was going to say it's communication, it's engagement. We have to ask questions and be a good listener. That to me is the bread and butter, black and white version of it. That's the answer.
Yeah, I mean, my quick answer was volunteer, get out there and listen. And just if you would listen and identify populations in that sense, they could be in your community, they could be close to you, they could be in your own house, they could be within your office. But again, I think it just comes down to open communication, listening, and then obviously there's statistical ways too. Thank you to Atlanta for providing those, where our government will poll and sort people into groups and everything else. But if we just want to be tackle this as humans, I think it's just, let's get out there and talk to people and listen and identify where those vulnerabilities or, risks lie, like we do in the cyber world, and then we apply a patch, which is, education and communication, right? It's no different. We can just we can find a process and follow it.
Any other panelists with comments?
The only thing that I would add is to start where they are already feeling safe. So try to get yourself invited into the safe space rather than trying to create a space where they need to come to. And I think that that's part of that reaching out, as you were talking about, Ryan, like developing outreach sorts of places. But, there are lots of organizations outside of the school atmosphere, because school just doesn't mean safe for everybody either. And so I think we have to tap into places where, in communities where that safety is felt, and meeting the needs of people who don't fit into the other boxes, let's say.
Yeah, and those are community centers, right? Those could be shelters, those could be the Legion, the local Legion. I've been invited to speak at the local Legion to a group of gentlemen, senior gentlemen, about cybersecurity. Of course, I'll take that opportunity, because, that's, again, going into their space and speaking to them and answering their questions and relating it to them. Same with Indigenous populations, and you can volunteer your time quite easily in your community if you just quickly look around. And if you're like anyone of us who are on the panel, you obviously like to talk and share your ideas. And so, getting out there and kind of doing that in the community, I think will go a long way.
I was also thinking about all the different types of media where people can get education. So cybersecurity focused podcasts or newsletters. I get one every single day that I read. Cybersecurity agencies, I'm not exactly sure which ones are in Canada, but I can speak for the United States, such as CISA, SANS, our FCC, the National Cybersecurity Alliance, are just a number of agencies or organizations that provide great information about cybersecurity awareness.
Yeah, we've got cyber, we've got the CSE and Cyber Security Canada. Like, we've got bodies that put out this information as well, and it's like, I know that I see all that information, and it's almost about sharing that to, I guess, like, kind of outside of your bubble, right? And I think that's kind of the big one, because a lot of this stuff is published and it's made, these resources are there, especially during October and Security Awareness Month. But again, if you're not in cybersecurity, you may not just see that pop up on your radar. So it's trying to kind of get those, those ideas outside of your bubble. Scott just posted the link there, the getcybersafe.gc.ca, a fantastic free resource of for Canadians, and a ton of information to pass on and to help people kind of navigate the internet, basically, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Alana for pointing out, you got to meet people where they feel safe, because the first instinct for a lot of us, especially techies, is, well, if what we're doing here in the Security Awareness Forum, works for us, why don't we just invite people in our organization to come and talk about it? And maybe they don't feel comfortable talking about it. Maybe they feel vulnerable identifying themselves as being part of one of those vulnerable organizations. So I think that's a perfect example and suggestion, great value in this session, just to understand you should go out and reach people and volunteer where those people are actually meeting and those things are being discussed in a safe space. All right. So go back to our presentation. Bear with me for a moment. We're going to do one more poll question. Let me finish this first one.
I'm just going to sum up real quickly. It's been burning on my mind. That statement that you just brought up, and you saying that, Elena, getting invited into safe spaces, it might sound trivial, but like, for me, it was just, I don't know why, that was a eureka moment. I've always been so focused as like an older brother to create safe spaces. That is a habit that I am in myself, and I can just taking a step back after you saying that and looking in now, I can see how that can be a little daunting, and I'm the one trying to go in and give the bear hug rather than receive it.
And I think, and I just think, like, just the way that Scott was at the very beginning of the panel today, that, being prepared to say, I don't know everything, that this is a lifelong learning thing. I'm going to just be adaptable and try to be like, model the fact that you're uncomfortable, but that you're comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like all of those things are part of learning how to be, I think, digitally fluent, cyber secure for a long, long time.
Yeah, I agree.
Amazing. Okay, next and last poll question. What is the most common type of injury from cyber attacks faced by vulnerable populations from your point of view? We can always look it up on the news and see what the stats are that are manipulated by some influencer or others, but just want to get an idea from people in this session what you think the most important or most common types of injury are that are happening right now. So I'm going to let that poll run for a little while, and we'll go to our last question, which is, what are some good ways to provide assistance to vulnerable individuals? We just actually sort of talked about this, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but are there free programs like the one that we posted? And I think Teresa mentioned CISA as well in the States, but there could be paid programs. There could be things that organizations might want to reach out to and try and implement within their organization. Any thoughts on those kinds of things?
I personally love podcasts. I find there is a subject in a person in a voice for everybody. I've done it before. I get an audiobook, so excited in the voice, like 2 chapters in, I'm like, I can't do it. So I find podcasts very informative. That's me.
So
That's cool.
what you like is the little bites, right, Dylan?
I love when they do the sections on the bottom as well, and they've broken it down into chapters. And instead of me having to commit to your 2.5-hour rant, I can pick and choose what I want to digest that day and come back to you. I'm a greedy bugger. So I like a finger in every pie. So I go to one podcast, take my few bits, go to the next one, do the same, and I just kind of revisit them.
Right. I think we have to, I'm sorry, Scott, but I think we have to return to the idea of motivation. And that, for me, I'm trying an app right now, again, that is going to help me be more conscientious, I hope, to sticking to a routine. I just to help me with like sleep habits, with eating habits, with exercise habits, all of those things, and just remembering to take time for myself. I want to be that person. I hate tracking. But there's something about getting a little gold star, or like that little clippy person that pops up and goes, I see you, you're doing great. I'm like, yay, star.
It sounds like you're a fan of gamified mechanics.
Right? It's something different for every person.
But the reward is nice. Like the Duolingo, I go back to this all the time, was the absolute best way to revisit and relearn French. There are so many different approaches, and just the old school way of reading and listening to it isn't good. The tutor wasn't going to work. It wasn't able to like commit to things, but all of a sudden you've got this fun app that says, like, great job, Ryan. And, it says bonjour every morning at 7 a.m. to get you going. And, it's like, okay, now I see, where my motivation lies, and you turn the corner, and you accept that challenge. So I think when we kind of liken this back to how do we help vulnerable populations, let's introduce them to technology. And, again, if they have access to the internet now, then there's a million tools we could make them available to them that will help them and guide them through this process. And there's a ton of free resources to be safe. There's a ton of free resources to be a better person, and once they discover their community and they can connect with more people, then hopefully the information can be shared. Because as we know, the internet is full of horrible things, but the one thing it is also full of is fantastic amounts of resources and great information, as long as you know where to look and you look at the right things. So I think guiding people to that and having the confidence to go out and research things themselves will, instead of just, again, it's leading a horse to water versus just teaching a horse how to drink. It's a different mindset of you give people the skills to be more cyber secure, then it's going to go a lot further than just talking at them or telling them. So podcasts, great idea, Dylan. Books, free games online, resources, links, PDFs, whatever the case may be. Let's just get the information into people's hands so they can make better choices.
Anything to light that fire, because that's how we all are. And once you that little spark is there, and you get a little breath of air and that flame builds. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm a rabbit hole guy. Once I'm in something, it's dive on in.
I refer to something Teresa said earlier that I think also speaks to this topic, which is about sort of the personalization, the individualization pieces that are involved in that. And also, I think Dylan and Ryan, you both mentioned too, like, knowing where the relevancy is to that person is important. But one of the pieces of game making or online communities that I've seen people spend a ridiculous amount of time in, that's very motivating for them, clearly, is the personalization of things like their avatar and their profile. And I was just wondering about, you know, in the contexts that you've all created in terms of cybersecurity learning, is that something that you intentionally do because you know it's motivating?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, what I'm going to show you right now, going back to the ClickArmor site, it's the best way to show you. Let me find it. It's just our settings, personal settings. So when you go as a user, let me just go back to learning. So if I'm a user, I have my screen kind of small here. There we go. And I say, you know what, how did these people change their names? Well, if you just go into settings, you can say, okay, well, I can change my name from Zoltrox to, you know, Superman or whatever I want, or I can change my avatar. And I can search. This is like 700 avatars that were designed by an artist who's very big on inclusivity and diversity. And so all these things, even indigenous people with headdress, it's all authentic. Like it's modeling their own style. So this is what we can actually do within the platform. And we find that it does give people that sense of ownership. Once they've set their avatar and their name, then it's theirs. And they see themselves more clearly, and it does motivate them to come back in and do things. So thanks for that little opportunity.
There's great research on the fact too that people will engage more deeply with anything that we consider a text, a game, a book, whatever, if they can see themselves in it.
Mm-hmm.
So if we believe it's a fundamental literacy, which I do, then we have to make sure that identity is a part of that.
Awesome. All right, we're getting near the end. So what I'm going to do now is just review our poll results, which should be interesting. So let me see. Let me know if you can see this. There we go. So the first poll question was, have you or your organization been involved in supporting vulnerable populations? So yeah, over half of the respondents said they have, which is great. Yeah, I didn't know how that was going to come about, but I think it's really good to see, and we want to keep that momentum going and increase it if possible. Second question was, what was it? Helping vulnerable populations. Well, what do you think are among the most vulnerable populations? So interestingly, because we made this one multiple option, you could select as many as you want. Some people just said all of the above. And that's kind of what we actually were hoping for, because as we've kind of covered a lot of different things here, there are so many commonalities in all of the vulnerable or at-risk populations. You know, it's very hard to isolate one or two. But down from that, you know, individuals over 75, individuals with mental health issues were also raised as really prominent ones. So thank you, everybody, for your input on those. And lastly, what is the most common type of injury? And it looks like mental distress, identity theft resulting from fraud, direct fraud, as well as malware, ransomware, and risk of physical harm. So
it's
go ahead,
interesting.
Ryan.
I like that. I just like that mental distress thing, because that is really kind of highlighting, you know, the human-centric side of things, that it doesn't matter if I lost $1,000 or $10,000 or had to go stand in the lineup at the bank to get a new credit card, or, you know, all had to fight on hold for hours to get a charge reversed. You know, all these things that we've all had to go through, right? Reset your passwords. You know, those things don't really matter. It's how you feel after. And Scott, I mean, when you told the story at the top of the session about your recent, you know, experience, like, you made a great point about how you kind of then sat back and analyzed your emotions. And I think that's kind of the most important part of it, because, like, again, it doesn't matter about, you know, the money and the things and the time. It's all about how you feel and how you come out of this, so you could, you know, hopefully prepare yourself better for the future. So it's super interesting to see the mental distress on there, you know, because I think that is literally the worst part of cybercrime, of almost any crime. You know, it's not just you know, a cybercrime, you know, problem. It's in general. So
Yeah. Any other comments on the poll results? Any surprises or things you'd like to reinforce?
What I'm thinking is, if we try to design anything thinking about what we want the result to be, which is, I hope, safety, security, some knowledge about how to protect themselves, how do we backwards design that meeting the needs of every person. And I think we've uncovered a lot of places where we can begin today. I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I actually wanted to take this opportunity. This is the point in the session where, after we've covered all the polls and the open discussion, what do you feel were the session's best insights? We like to try and highlight things for executives who can kind of make things happen on a bigger scale, but also for the implementers, the people managing, awareness programs and doing outreach, and as well just individuals. So if anybody has thoughts, just put them in the chat. What did you find most useful in this session today? Any comments, Dylan, on what you got the most out of in this session?
Right off the bat, me personally as an individual, taking the whole new approach of trying to be invited in. That might sound insane to a lot of people, but for me, it's like I have always worked very hard to be the safe space. And it's not that I've been pushing away or, not listening to people, but really it's something I work on in my personal life, being sensitive to that. Yeah. I think is one of the biggest takeaways, and that translates to everything that we're doing here.
I think I got the same message as you, Dylan. I think it's a huge kind of learning moment for me there.
Mm-hmm.
That was definitely one of my notes as well, as get invited to safe spaces and creating the safe spaces. And so, with Pop-Cykol, we have different resources that are free resources and paid resources, but having that sense of empathy for someone and not making them feel ashamed or embarrassed that they clicked on the phishing link or that they cyberbullied someone, just kind of understanding. I think that because I come from anthropology and not like computer science or something like that, I have a little bit more sense about human behavior and culture. But understanding what are the motivations behind what they did. Like, is there fear, or is there like intrigue, or is it greed or something else that made them perform a certain way?
That's a really good point, Teresa. I recently had a phishing prompt from an old friend who I hadn't spoken to in a while. And that was the reason it got me to go to the next click, was because I was worried about that person. I'm like, oh no, if they're vulnerable, I should reach out, right? So there's a responsibility, sort of obligation sort of feeling. And what Scott said earlier also made me think it's not only about creating the safe space, but making that safe space sort of open 24/7. Because if that attack happens, then that also means that maybe someone has a new motivation to learn. And I want to be there. I want to be able to provide that for them when they're ready.
And allowing the person who's experienced the attack to know how to communicate to other people who may have been affected by the attack. I'm thinking about a friend of mine named Dan who got caught in a blockchain cryptocurrency attack, and people thought he needed money and they were going to send him crypto, and then it was a bad actor. And so how can he properly explain to his loved ones that he was hacked? And so giving language to people is really important. I think in cybersecurity and technology, artificial intelligence, especially blockchain, the language that we use is so kind of like up here, and we have to be very cognizant of our audience. So, for me, as someone who's doing cybersecurity awareness for kids, I always think about the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, and how, and trying to couch that language in a very simplistic manner so that people can understand it. Even for people who are older, the senior citizens, like if I start talking about MFA and they don't know what MFA stands for, I've lost them.
I know some IT managers that don't know what MFA stands for. That's pretty sad. So anyway.
There's some really good stuff in the chat. Do we have time to address it?
Yeah, for sure.
One of them is that Tony made a really interesting comment. Ryan, do you want me to like?
Oh no, go ahead. I mean, you're not stealing my thunder at all. Yeah.
Just that, being able to be there with resources, again, because that's another comfort level thing, right? To say, I can't like sit down with you now for 20 minutes, but go check this out, right? Or here's a guidance, right? That sort of thing. I put a link in the chat earlier that speaks, I think, to Monica's question about something that we're trying here in Canada called Cyber Legends. And the reason we're checking it out is because it's about developing, as you said, like that less scary vocabulary. So instead of a common word with a number, doing that multi-phrase thing, it was really interesting because the grade 4s were like, teacher, what's my password? Now that they had just created a 3-thing password, but the grade 6s were ready with their phones to take a picture of it. Like they had already anticipated this was a thing that was something they were going to need to remember. And so I don't know if it was an age difference or it was a readiness difference, but it was just like what's happening in the chat. People saying, did you remember to turn off the light? Did you remember to, right? Did you remember to hold hands when you cross the street? Yeah, like that kind of thing, right?
And I think the speaking from experience thing goes a long way. So again, I'm going to give shout out to Scott because he spoke to your experience at the top of this episode, because it shows that we're all people, we're all normalized, we're all vulnerable, we're all susceptible, we're all going to make mistakes, and we're going to wake up tomorrow and be a better person and move forward, right? And then to reference Cyber Legends, Farzan, I just had the pleasure of hearing him speak at an EDC event in the last couple of weeks. And he is the founder of this company that's trying to provide training and education to youth around cybersecurity, but it comes from a place where he was a victim of child exploit. And when he tells his story, it's it just stops a room, and it's a powerful moment. And so I think we looking at that, that is our strongest ability. Stand on top of your experiences. Don't be ashamed of them, and get them out there, because that will inspire others to stop and listen, and to take down a resource, or to think about maybe what their kids are doing online, or it's going to change the culture the more we just stop and listen to people. But we need more and more people to kind of tell their stories and help connect us as as a community.
Thanks for posting in the chat, Teresa. I was just about to ask if anybody could help Monica's question about she wants to be able to teach cybersecurity to kids. Any good links? I don't have them, but I'm glad you posted them. So thanks for that.
I got you.
That's cool. All right, folks, really close to the end right now. Just want to let people know that as a result of having done these bi-weekly sessions, now this is number 33 or so. So we've been doing it for well over a year, almost a year and a half. And it was getting a little bit hard to manage reaching out to people. Now I think we're getting a little more scalable, but we have this community now that we created called the cybersecurity-awareness-forum.com website. And so it's a place hoping to be a safe space for people who care about security awareness training and generally awareness of all kinds. So please come and join us in this community. We'll try and support you. We'll post all of our recordings here and notifications of events. So we'd love to see everybody joining this community. And then finally, our next session is going to be in 2 weeks. It'll actually be our last session of 2023, because 2 weeks later will be the 27th of December. I don't think we'll get a lot of attendees in that one. So be December 13th, and the next one will be January 10th after that. But we'll be just recounting the top cybersecurity awareness stories of 2023. What were the stories that made the news that were useful from the point of view of teaching people about cybersecurity? And maybe there were some that you feel were overblown, big news stories that really didn't help us. And maybe we'll even make some predictions about what we might see in cybersecurity next year. So really hope everybody has a chance to join us for that session in 2 weeks. Again, Wednesday, December 13th at 1 p.m. It's not daylight time, it's Eastern Standard Time, sorry. So that's it for the session today. Really want to thank all our panelists, Monica, Elena, Teresa, and Dylan, and of course, Ryan. I think it was a great discussion, really rich concepts and great lessons learned. So thanks everybody for joining us. Do hope you'll come back again in a couple of weeks. And until next time, stay safe.
Have a lovely day, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Dylan, Teresa, and Alana. You guys were fantastic. This could have gone on for hours and the entire afternoon. Seriously, it was a great conversation. I hope you're still recording, Scott, just because this is brilliant.
Yeah.
One day, Dylan is going to regret that dance, and I
My
can't wait.
go-to. Oh
I
yeah.
can't wait to find the reason to make him regret that.
Anybody
I
have
got the hips and I use them.
anybody have a pet they want to bring up on screen too? You know,
Yeah, we didn't have. We had one. We had the one
Elizabeth or
panel where we
Pino,
had
yeah.
everyone except everyone had pets except for
That's right.
us.
Well, anyways, yeah, I really had a lot of fun today, folks. I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to run, so the session will get cut off in a moment, but
Likewise.
really appreciate you. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Have a
Let's
great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye everyone.